Hey everyone, welcome back to General Knowledge. We have talked about countries that don't exist, potential new countries, and unknown countries. Today, for something completely different, we'll talk about unrecognized countries in the continent of Africa. If you guys enjoy this, I can also do it for Europe and other places as well. There are 54 countries in Africa, which is a lot. Sometimes I feel like I forget about a large number of them, but throughout history, including up to this point, there are also some disputed areas and some regions or movements who have declared themselves independent, creating unrecognized countries. This means they are not fully or sometimes even partially recognized by their fellow neighbors and or by the international community. Before we start, a thank you to the sponsor for this video, Squarespace, the best all-in-one platform to build your online presence. I'll talk about them a little more later on in the video. So let's take a look at a few of these unrecognized countries. First, Bir Tawil. Now, I had absolutely no idea about this. It's a very small piece of land in North Sudan on the border with Egypt. What's interesting about this one is that it isn't really a country. In fact, it's pretty much nothing. Despite being shown on maps as part of Sudan, it isn't claimed by them, nor by Egypt or anyone else. However, it all comes from the border agreement between the UK and the two countries. In 1899, a treaty established that Bir Tawil was for Sudan and the Halaib Triangle area for Egypt. But another deal from 1902 establishes the opposite. They want the other country to have it because that would mean sovereignty over the Halaib Triangle area, which has an important port of the Red Sea. It is the only land in the world, except parts of Antarctica, which isn't claimed by any nation. Apparently, a few individuals have gone there and attempted to claim it for themselves, but without much luck, not being recognized as sovereign rulers by anyone. Plus, there doesn't seem to be anyone or anything to rule. The area is just literally a piece of the Sahara Desert. Next, we go to the west, to the Republic of the Rif in North Morocco. Now, this one happened a little while ago, from 1921 to 1926. At this time, the area was still heavily under Spanish colonial rule. Some of the local population weren't too happy about that. However, some of the region was already under Moroccan rule as well. Regardless, locals, especially Berber natives, decided to rebel against the French and then the Spanish colonial rule, and against the Moroccan Sultan. The Rifans, as they were known, attempted to establish a modern republic and an internationally recognized state. However, they weren't too successful. Soon after, lasting only 5 years, they were defeated by the Spanish army, which, along with the French, created a joint task force of about 500,000 men supported by tanks and aircraft, a much superior force than that of the locals. However, more recently, in 2013, new calls for Rifan independence began to resurge. Apart from Ceuta and Melilla, the area is now fully under Moroccan control. So if the locals want independence, that's who they'll have to convince. A little to the east, Cyrenaica. This one differs a little from the rest in the aspect that it was actually recognized by a major world power. It existed from 1949 to 1951, when Emir Said Idris proclaimed a sovereign state in the region. He was supported by the United Kingdom. There is some historical validity to their claim for independence. The Berbers were the early inhabitants of the region, according to records, but it was then ruled by ancient Egypt, the Greeks, the Persians, the Romans, and then the Ottomans, a lot of times as a separate area from the neighboring regions. However, at this time, the United Nations stated they would only support the independence of the entirety of Libya, incorporating all regions of the former colony. So, in 1951, this short-lived and mostly unrecognized state was dissolved. Number 4 on this list is Logon. It's inside the Central African Republic, taking up what I would say is a very significant part of the country. Local rebels declared independence, or at least a desire for independence, in 2015. But a lot of analysts state that this declaration of independence doesn't actually represent a desire for a real independence. What they want is more autonomy within the Central African Republic, and so they would be using this strong stance as a way of strengthening their position for more autonomy in the negotiations, a sort of give us what we want or we'll leave position, which sounds a little familiar. Their flag has 3 horizontal stripes, in yellow for the gold in the region, black representing the supposed abandonment by the government, and green for the fertility of the land. The center has a black star, which supposedly stands for the struggle of the people for self-determination. This next one is part of Angola, although its territory is separated from it, Cabinda. It's sort of inside the Republic of Congo or the Democratic Republic of Congo, bordering both of them. It's one of those weird cases where the owning country doesn't actually border the region, sort of like that Russian enclave in Europe. The area is called Cabinda, and for about 1 year it attempted to be its own country. During Angola's independence in 1975, there were many liberation movements. In that year, 3 of them were invited to meet and talk, but a 4th one was not, the one operating in Cabinda. Being probably upset about this, they declared independence. But there is some historical truth to their claim. Its initial status as a Portuguese protectorate known as the Portuguese Congo, like we see in this regional stamp of the time. It had a separate history and legal status to that from the much larger Portuguese West Africa, dating to its creation in 1883. But soon after the 19th century Declaration of Independence, the Angolan army took control in 1976. But they didn't give up, fighting a guerrilla war for a long time, until 2006. And even today, they still seem to have a government in exile. Now, like I mentioned, today's video was made possible by Squarespace. So I'd like to tell you a little more about their services. Squarespace is the best place for building a website. I was trying to choose from which services of theirs I should point out, and I realized they offer literally everything, from podcast support to mailing lists, online stores, embedded marketing tools and analytics, plus a simple interface with beautiful designs. I'm currently building my own general knowledge website on Squarespace, and it's honestly incredible. I'm building a place where you can access all the videos, text, maybe even merch, and Squarespace allows me to do all of this in a simple way with the best quality you can possibly find. If you want to try Squarespace, just go to squarespace.com/generalknowledge and you'll get a free trial plus a great 10% discount on the purchase of any website or domain. Now, let's get back to the countries. In southern Congo, there are 2. South Kasai and Katanga. Let's start with South Kasai. It was also a very brief experience at a country. It seceded from Congo during a period of very big instability in 1960, but it looks like their desire wasn't exactly to affirm themselves as a new nation with a separate identity. It was simply to distance themselves from a regime they didn't agree with. Because 2 years later, in 1962, there was a coup d'etat in Congo, and South Kasai, now probably more aligned with the regime, decided to come back and rejoin the country. And then, south of South Kasai, we have Katanga. This one is a little different from the previous one, despite declaring independence in the same year of 1960. It is said, and I'm not sure if this is true, that the state of Katanga, which by the way has a pretty cool flag, was supported by Belgian troops. The area is very rich. It has sources of copper, gold, and uranium, so this was probably behind their desire for independence. They eventually surrendered and rejoined Congo in 1963 after the intervention of troops by the United Nations, who took Congo's side. Now let's get to the south. Do you know how inside South Africa there are 2 independent states, Lesotho and Eswatini? Well, at a certain point there were a few more. They all ended in 1994, but still lasted a while. They were Transkei, the Republic of Bohudatswana, Venda, and Ciskei, as early as 1913. Even during British occupation, there were reserves for native inhabitants of the region, and eventually 4 of them, these 4, were actually granted independence in 1976, 77, 79, and 81 respectively. They were recognized by South Africa, but this also created an excuse for South African nationality to be removed from its people, leaving them without access to many services like healthcare. No other country in the world recognized them as independent states, and in 1994, they were all reincorporated. Back north, and with one of the coolest flags I've seen, Ambazonia, or better, the Federal Republic of Ambazonia, which makes sense because its flag sort of resembles the US one, maybe mixed with Greece. They have declared independence 3 times, in 1984, 2006, and very recently in 2017. Apparently, the reason for it is some sort of tension between the French and English-speaking regions of Cameroon. The claimed territory was formerly known as the British Southern Cameroons. These days, the battle seems to be only a legal issue, with the English-speaking population challenging the Cameroon constitution. And finally, off the coast of Madagascar, Anjouan. They are an island in the Comoros archipelago just off the African coast, and their story of independence has had some bumps along the road. They were unhappy with the archipelago government in 1997, and they decided to declare independence. Then in 2002, they were granted more autonomy by a new president, so they rejoined. But then, 5 years later, when this president's term was about to end and elections were coming up, I guess, they decided to declare independence again, maybe thinking his successor wouldn't keep the promise of more autonomy. So those were a few of the unrecognized countries in the African continent, essentially areas which, for whatever reason, declared independence but were not accepted by their previous rulers and/or international community as sovereign states, being eventually reabsorbed into their original country or keeping their demands until today. If you guys enjoyed this, and I hope you did, let me know because I can also do this for other places in the world. Regardless, I hope you enjoyed this one. Leave a comment with your opinions, corrections, or just general thoughts, pun intended. Remember to subscribe if you want to catch future videos, and check out Squarespace through the link in the description. I will see you next time for more general knowledge.